Welcome to RW Woodworks. My name is Rahim, and you know a lot of people think woodworking happens only out in the shop. But that's not necessarily true. I spend a lot of time right here, researching, designing projects, and even editing videos so you guys have content to watch. And therefore, I spend a significant amount of time right here in front of my computer. And that's why I want to customize this place for it to be personable and enjoyable for me. In this video, I'm going to take this perfectly good slab of walnut, sand it down to bare wood, use our brand new CNC to carve in our logo right here in the center, and then fill it with some cool epoxy with some LEDs to jazz it up a little bit more. But before we get started, we just hit 2,500 subscribers on this channel, and I want to do a massive giveaway in this video. But you got to hang out in the video. A little later, I'll tell you how to apply for it. There'll be more than one winner, so make sure not to miss out. Also, this video is sponsored by FlexiSpot. Thank you, FlexiSpot. Make sure to check out some links in the video description below for some awesome deals that they have, and more about them later in the video. At any rate, let's get this build started. Ow! To kick off this build, we started by safely putting aside this massive monitor and retiring this old school desktop that I hardly use anymore. Next, I removed the screws in the threaded inserts, and that was it. The slab was free to be manhandled outdoors. It was at this point I remembered how heavy this slab was and that I wasn't going to be able to finish this project without any help. At any rate, once I got the slab outdoors, I placed it on my Bora centipede workstand. Now look, I'm not sponsored by Bora, but if you're looking for a temporary bench solution, check out Bona Centipede Workstand. I've put the affiliate link in the video description below, and believe me, you will not be disappointed. It's lightweight, portable, and requires no tools or hardware to set up, and literally stores away in minimal space. Now back to this project. Call me old school, but my normal method of removing stain is to get a sander, stick on 40 or 60 grit sandpaper, and literally sand for hours. But I recently learned about stain stripping compounds. I personally like this Dumond Smart Strip as it doesn't use any harsh chemicals like methane chloride or NMP, so it's safe to use without deadly fumes or chemicals. You literally paint on a layer, and for best results you add a layer of shrink wrap so that it maintains its moisture longer. Oh, also make sure to take out the air bubbles once you get the shrink wrap on, and literally just wait it out. Now this slab took about 20 hours, but it's so much easier than sanding. I'll put the link in the video description below, and if you are about to strip out some paint, I highly recommend this for your next project. While this was doing its magic, I didn't know what to do with myself, so I stopped over at the local store to pick up some supplies, and when I realized this is going to take longer, I even broke out the lawnmower to get some chores done. The next morning, this was the result. To test if it was actually done, I peeled off a small portion of the shrink wrap, and it was so satisfying. The stain peeled off like butter. And with that success, I removed the remaining shrink wrap and used a plastic paint scraper to peel off all the stain. You have got to try this compound. It is a life changer. Finally, I just used a wet cloth to clean away the remaining compound, and the stain removal process was done. Next, I copied the logo on wax paper so I could get a good idea of what it would look like on the desktop. And to find the center point on the slab, I used the corner to corner method. No math required. Literally draw two diagonal lines from the opposite corners, and at the point where they cross in the center is the center of your material. For the logo, it was as simple as folding it twice on the X and Y axis, and where the crease meets is my center point. After punching a hole in the center of the logo, I placed it on the desktop. And with that, it was confirmed. I liked it. We're moving forward. Time to head back inside to the workshop, and man, oh man, this slab is too heavy to carry. I knew I would need some help putting this thing on the CNC in the next step. In comes Rignum once again. My neighbor, if you've seen my other videos, and he's always my guinea pig whenever I need some help. And I'm sure he's tired of it, but he hasn't expressed it yet. Now usually I can just hand tighten the clamps to get the board secured on the CNC, but this one, I could not take any chances. Once it was clamped down, I also ensured it was level. Next, there was nothing left to do but to chuck up the 1/4 inch downcut bit, calibrate it to the CNC, and press the play button. I could have walked away at this point, but watching a CNC do its thing is honestly mesmerizing. And I stood there for nearly 30 minutes watching the action happen. Once it was complete, I asked Rigdom once again to come over and help me take this thing off the CNC and put it on my workbench. Hey, just a reminder, if you like this content, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. By then, Amazon had also delivered all my supplies, and here's all what I ordered for this project. A bunch of LEDs from BTF Lighting, a soldering kit, and a sample set of pigment colors. Oh, and one more thing, the epoxy itself. So here's the high-level plan. I cut these LED strips into pieces that'll fit into the logo, and the goal here is that they would continue from one end to the next with these wires, and if I solder them correctly, they would continue in a straight line, and that way I would only need one power supply to power all the LEDs. Now you can get LEDs in many different configurations, but this particular one came with 3 wires. One positive, one negative, and in the middle was the data wire. And as far as soldering is concerned, the best path I found was to strip away the double-sided tape pre-installed on the LED strips and expose the terminals beneath, and then solder it away. Oh, and don't forget to use flux, which ensures that it removes all the oxide films that get developed on metals when they're being soldered. Great job, Raheem. I guess that's a hand shot. You know, eventually I'm gonna have to invest in a proper workstation for soldering, but in the meantime, I guess our tapes are what we're gonna use to hold it together. Here's a pro tip for you. It's always helpful to load some solder onto each of the terminals and the wire before you actually go in and solder. And for additional strength, as well as ensuring that these things stay somewhat waterproof, I added some hot glue to each of the terminals. Obviously to the top and on the bottom. And here's another tip for you. Hot glue does not stick on wax paper, so when it dries up, you can peel it right off. Now our next step was to glue down the LEDs within the logo, because if we didn't do this, then as soon as we put in the epoxy, the LEDs would literally start floating. The best thing I found to use here was 5-minute epoxy. With the crescent complete, it was time to work on the actual letters themselves. And the hot glue, you know, if I had a little extra, I just used a pair of scissors to cut the excess off. And that helped it fit right in. The next step was to drill a few holes to pass the main wires required to power the LEDs. And while you watch me do this, let me tell you about the contest. It's actually very simple. 4 random winners will be selected and receive a $50 Amazon gift card by email. And to be eligible, all you have to do is 3 things. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and start a comment with the word FlexiSpot, followed by the color you would choose for this epoxy build. Remember, there will be 4 winners, and the selection will be done exactly 4 weeks after this video goes live. And note that any information collected will be used for the sole purpose of delivering the prize to the winner, and nothing else. Also, this contest is not sponsored by YouTube, and we are solely responsible for this contest and delivering the prize to the winner. Lastly, please see the contest start and end date along with more details in the video description below. And now back to the project. With the holes drilled and the cables temporarily secured with black tape, here's your first view at what this looks like. Now, just before I poured the epoxy, I ensured the bottom was sealed by putting some hot glue as well as tuck tape. It was finally time for the epoxy pour. Now, I know everyone on YouTube uses Total Boat, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I chose to use Epoxy instead for a couple of reasons. this epoxy is actually a very simple 1-to-1 ratio like many others, and it's also self-leveling. But most importantly, this epoxy resin is UV resistant and doesn't turn yellow. And since I'm using LEDs, which produce a small amount of UV, I wanted to use extra caution. Overkill? 100%. But isn't that what woodworkers do? Actually, in hindsight, I'm using orangish colored epoxy resin anyway. I don't think this would have really mattered, but gave me a little bit more peace of mind. Now during this pour, much like almost every single epoxy project, I always get a couple of minor heart attacks. Now the easy one was I forgot to level the table and noticed that the epoxy was all heading one direction. That was easily resolved. But as you can see here, I had one connector that was starting to float. I must not have used enough 5-minute epoxy, but that's okay. I learned this trick a while back. Use a small piece of wood like a toothpick to push down whatever is starting to float until the epoxy starts to set, and then you can remove it right before it sets completely. Boy, this project is really starting to come together. After the epoxy set, the first thing I wanted to do is temporarily connect the wires to ensure the lights were still working. And with that confirmed, the next step was to sand off all the excess epoxy. Now you can use a regular sander with maybe 60 or 80 grit, sandpaper, and work your way up the grits. But since we have a drum sander, that's the path I'll take. Now you see, that was easier said than done because this project is slightly different than other epoxy projects. Now this is an added step that I'm doing here that normally most epoxy projects don't have. You see, we have cables coming out from the bottom of the desktop. And if I don't protect those, then when I run the desktop through the drum sander, it's going to ruin the cables. So my solution was to add some 3/4 inch plywood on the base stuck together with CA glue to ensure that those cables never touch the base of the drum sander. I know what you're thinking. I added even more weight to this project. And there was no way I was going to be able to run this through the drum sander alone. This time around, it wasn't Rignum because it was late night and I think he was already asleep. Because as I went to go knock on his door, I heard the snoring and I'm pretty sure that was him. Now there's 2 tricks that I'll tell you when it comes to running a board through the drum sander. First, make sure it's flat. It doesn't go up or down as it's going through the drum sander. That's going to cause a divot. Number 2, make sure you have a dust collection on hand to clean the board in between runs, because that's definitely going to clog up your drum sander. Now that was extremely satisfying, but that does not take me out of the woods from sanding. I went through all the grits, started at 80, then 120, then 180, and then I used 400 grit by hand directly on the epoxy. And in the midst of all this, one of the air bubbles got exposed, and I just used some CA glue to fill that back up. One tip I definitely want to highlight here is that whenever you're sanding epoxy, you always want to have a cleaning eraser on hand because it will clog up your sandpaper and it will create scratches on your work. Between each grit, I got to see the beautiful grain because I used a wet cloth to ensure I got all the excess sand off the desktop. And with that complete, it was finally time to add stain. I started by wiping down the project with the tack cloth, which ensured there was no sand left over on the desktop. And the stain for this project is none other than Odie's oil. There's so many things to love about this stain, but the ease of use and the beautiful grain that it pulls out has got to be the top 2 things. There's a couple of key things to remember when it comes to Odie's oil. Before applying the oil, you have to stir it to get the consistency to be slightly liquidy instead of the solid which you'll find when you initially open the container. Next, when it comes to the application, you want to use an abrasive pad and you really got to rub this in vigorously. And remember, a little bit goes a long way. I kid you not, there's nothing better in woodworking than watching a project come alive when you add stain to it. Don't forget that corner, Raheem. Okay, good. Next step was to leave the wood fully saturated and allow it to absorb in. Usually takes between 40 minutes to an hour. Just remember, the longer you wait, the harder it'll be to buff it off. But the best way to check is to run a dry finger through the project. And if it doesn't leave a streak, it's ready to be buffed. And the final step is to take a lint-free cloth and go right back at it again. The harder you buff, the better you're going to have a turnout. With the desktop complete, it was time to put our attention on the base. Now let me level set with you. Ever since work from home became a real thing, I've been searching for an affordable yet sturdy sit-stand desk, but with no real luck. Either they were cheap and flimsy, or sturdy and way out of my budget. Now when FlexiSpot reached out to me to review their E7 PLUS, I was excited, but skeptical. Well, that was till I received the shipment. First of all, the base came in 2 heavy boxes and really well packaged. And as soon as I unboxed the package, I knew I was in for a treat. But before we get into the details, let's talk about the assembly, which was fairly simple, and the instructions were straightforward. Now, I obviously had to drill new holes for my desktop, but other than that, the assembly was a breeze. The last thing I had to do was to hide the cables, and FlexiSpot has many accessories for their desks, including cable management solution. As you can see, my family immediately adopted the use of FlexiSpot E7 PLUS. Overall, if you've ever considered a sit-stand desk, here are a few key benefits to consider. Standing burns more calories and gives you a boost of energy because of the better blood circulation. It also improves your posture and helps reduce things like back pain and other strains on your body. Finally, if your workday seems long and you find yourself distracted, standing up can give you that focus or boost that you need to increase your productivity too. Now for what's actually important. How good is this desk? Well, this desk has a range from 26 inches all the way up to 51.6 inches. And it can hold a whopping 540 pounds. I had no choice but to put that statement to test. So I took it all the way up and changed the light bulb. And believe me when I tell you, this desk didn't even flinch at my 6-foot tall body at 220 pounds. And that doesn't even include this ridiculously heavy slab of walnut as well as this 40-pound monitor. Before we jump into that beautiful B-roll, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in and to FlexiSpot for sending over this E7 PLUS. Don't miss out on FlexiSpot's store-wide summer sale going on right now with deals of up to 50% off on all your favorite products. And if you're in the market for a sit-stand desk, I would highly recommend you check out FlexiSpot's E7 PLUS. You will not be disappointed. Also, if you use this promo code during checkout, you'll receive an additional $50 off on your E7 PLUS purchase. Now, without further ado, let's roll that B-roll.